What was your relationship with the Futures community?
The one thing that struck me about the Futures community is that everybody helps each other, even entities that are in fierce competition with each other. And it's a real characteristic of the industry, unlike the banking sector, where there's a sense of competitive collegiality. I experienced this in many ways, and I want to take this opportunity to thank you, John, for your collegiality. I wasn't a competitive collegiality because we weren't in competition, but you were collegiate enough to share your insight and your knowledge to help me get up to speed with this quite complicated subject matter when I arrived in 2002 and in subsequent years too. So you were a very good example of that. You mentioned John Damgard, the former president of the Futures Industry Association, which is the job that now Walt Lucan has, of course. From John Damgard to Walt and everybody in between at the FIA, same thing. Collegiality, friendliness, cooperation, fun also. I mean, these people are great fun. I mean, and the characters are larger than life generally. I mean, let's talk about John Damgard. I mean, for those who know John, I need to explain what I mean by that. He was the most astonishing storyteller, is the most astonishing storyteller. I would always love sitting there listening to him. He kind of represented a lot of the character of the industry, which I really liked. It was fun covering it because of people like him and because of people in the Chicago Board of Trade pits, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange pits. I met Don Wilson very early on in the options pit. In fact, he was in the options pit when I was taken in one morning before the bell, which apparently was against all the rules of the exchange at the time. I shouldn't have been in there, but somebody snuck me in because I'd said to them, I want to see what open outcry trading's like. Don Wilson was there. He was great to hang around with. Jeff Carter at the Merc, really great guy, helpful guy. He was interested to help me understand, and so many people were interested to help me understand this weird Brit. People were always very keen to help demystify what was going on as well and make it understandable. I think that's a very good thing.
How did you go about promoting your stories?
So I was at an event, it's a global leadership conference that the CME had in Naples, Florida every year, and they had big names come and speak. They had Tony Blair one year, and then they had George W. Bush promoting the book that he'd written, standing there, signing copies of book after book after book after book. And I remember going up to him saying, "You must get tired of this, signing this and shaking people's hands." And he just looked at me and said, "It's in my self-interest." And he chuckled. And I was like, "Yep, fair enough. It is in your self-interest. That's why you're doing it." And so it was in my self-interest to promote my stories, obviously. I mean, you see what happens now with social media. There is an obsessive self-promotion that goes on, which I find rather distasteful. Why wouldn't I promote my stories? Number one, because there is obviously a little bit of narcissistic journalistic ego in there. But I felt very strongly that the FT needed to be promoted, regardless of me. Because, as I said earlier, the FT was the underdog in America. The default read for the business and financial community is the Wall Street Journal. And I felt that I wanted to try and do something about that in Chicago. Chicago was home, and probably still is home, to an incredible concentration of Fortune 250 companies. Back in the day, there were more Fortune 250 or Fortune 500 companies in Illinois than in any other state outside New York State. That was a huge thing. But many of those companies were companies that people either hadn't heard of, like Illinois Toolworks, which is a massive company, huge market capitalization. Companies in the Midwest like Caterpillar, John Deere, I mentioned those before. Abbott Labs, massive company, right there in Illinois or Michigan, I can't remember. Then you had Kraft, McDonald's. And then it starts to add up. You start to realize that actually, in that cluster of broadly Chicagoland, you have a real concentration of global companies. And so I thought, why shouldn't the FT be better than us? Because this is our constituency. They should know about this product. But I also learned that you can't push it too far, because the Chicago business community was quite close-knit. They weren't necessarily that welcoming of outsiders. And you had to spend a bit of time getting to know them before they would trust you. I got a flavor of this very much when I was doing a story for the FT about Chicago's clubs, the Union League Club, the Executive Club, the Chicago Club. All these clubs, wood-paneled places full of good old boys. Bluntly, it was mostly good old boys. I hope that's changed since then. It was quite a rarefied atmosphere and not always the most welcoming of, as I said, outsiders. And so I had to work a little hard with some of the people who were members of those clubs to get them to understand what the FT was. And I remember I was in the Chicago Club. In the lobby of the club, it was, and probably still is, a table with all the newspapers laid out. So when I went in there, first year or so I was there, you'd have the Chicago Tribune, Chicago Sun-Times, the Wall Street Journal, and that was it. So I thought, we've got to get the FT in here. The FT needs to be in here because this is full of CEOs of big companies. I made a gentle suggestion to the general manager of the club, and I remember him saying to me, our members have no interest in that publication. He didn't mean it, I don't think, but what he really meant was, I don't want to have to think about that kind of, don't come at me from, I'm not interested in this stuff. It's beyond what I'm used to. So there's a deep conservatism that I encountered in Chicago. It took 2 years to get the FT, and I wasn't on the sales side. I wasn't responsible for the circulation of the FT because I handed that off to the circulation guys. But I made an initial suggestion to our guys internally, you need to persuade the Chicago Club to take on the FT because it's a no-brainer. They should have it. It took about 2 years, and the real moment of victory was when the FT held an event in Chicago, and we invited the then mayor of Chicago, Richard M. Daley, to give a talk at the cocktail reception, and he gave a shout out to how he loved the FT, which he did. He was a big fan of the FT. He used to get it every day, clip articles out and send it to various departments in City Hall when he saw something that they needed to be reading. And he gave a big shout out to the FT in the Chicago Club. And it was such rather a sweet moment, I have to say. I tell that series of rambling stories to illustrate how I learned that you had to kind of get to allow people time to get to know you. It goes back to what I was saying earlier on about the leadership in the Chicago exchanges and trust. It took a bit of time, and that's how it works in the Midwest. You can't just barrel in there New York style. It's a different kind of conversation. It's a different way of doing business. And I learned that.